The story of the F-15 does not begin with a roar of engines or the flash of combat. It begins with fear. Not fear in the cockpit, not fear in the sky, but fear inside conference rooms in Washington during the early 1970s, at the height of the Cold War, when the United States watched Soviet aviation evolve faster than expected, and realized, almost too late, that the balance of power was shifting. In 1967, the Soviets revealed the MiG-25, a monster of a fighter that stunned American intelligence. It was enormous, powerful, fast enough to threaten reconnaissance aircraft and intercept anything in the sky. Western analysts panicked. For a moment, the United States believed it was behind, truly behind, in the one arena where falling behind could cost the war without a single shot fired: air superiority. And air superiority, in the American doctrine, was not negotiable. Inside the Pentagon, the response was immediate. A new fighter had to be created, something beyond anything seen before, not just a counter to the MiG-25, but a declaration. A declaration that the United States would never again allow the Soviet Union to dictate the pace of aviation. That declaration would become the F-15 Eagle. The development was brutal, relentless, and obsessive. Engineers worked under crushing pressure. Test pilots risked their lives in prototypes that pushed structural limits. Every bolt, every panel, every angle of the aircraft was shaped with one purpose: to ensure that when American pilots entered the sky, they would never fight on equal terms. They would always dominate. That was the birth philosophy of the F-15. Not parity, superiority. Air dominance, not air competition. By the time the first Eagle lifted into the air in 1972, the United States had created something the world had never seen before: a fighter that could outclimb, outturn, out-accelerate, and outfight anything on the planet. But the Soviets did not see a legend. They saw a problem they believed they could solve. Soviet aviation bureaus, known for their aggressive engineering and ruthless effectiveness, dismissed early American claims as propaganda. Soviet pilots joked that the Americans had built another paper champion, a fighter that looked deadly on posters and briefing slides, but would wilt the moment it faced real combat. Soviet commanders laughed at the idea that a single aircraft could dominate wars. They believed combat was won with numbers, with mass, with overwhelming formations of MiGs that could swarm the enemy until the sky belonged to the motherland. But the F-15's story would not be written in theory. It would be written in the air, in real radar locks, real missiles fired, real dogfights painted against the sky. And the first nation to prove what the F-15 truly was would not be the United States. It would be Israel. In the mid-1970s, tensions in the Middle East surged again. The Soviet Union supplied Syria with squadrons of MiGs and some of the best training their advisors could give. Israeli intelligence knew war was inevitable. They needed a fighter that could survive being outnumbered, outpositioned, and out-supported. They received the F-15, and the world changed. The first combat kill of an Eagle came on June 27, 1979, when Israeli pilots engaged Syrian MiG-21s over southern Lebanon. The MiGs dove aggressively, confident in their numbers and maneuverability. But confidence evaporated the moment the radar cross-section of the Eagle lit up their scopes. The F-15 locked a MiG at distances the Syrian pilots did not believe possible. A missile streaked into the sky. A MiG exploded. The Eagle had taken its first life. And it would not stop. Over the next several years, Israeli F-15s carved through Soviet-built fighters one after another. MiG-21s, MiG-23s. It did not matter. The F-15 killed at long range, at medium range, at close range. It killed above the clouds and below them. It killed in sunlight and at night. Soviet advisors who watched the engagements through radar screens could not understand what they were seeing. The Eagle wasn't just winning dogfights, it was erasing them. Israel's ace record with the F-15 grew so quickly that Soviet analysts refused to believe the reports. They blamed pilot error. They blamed tactics. They blamed radar jamming. They blamed anything except the truth. The F-15 was exactly what the Americans said it was. In 1982, during the famous Operation Mole Cricket 19, the F-15 reached mythical status. Israel launched a massive operation to destroy Syrian air defenses in the Bekaa Valley. Dozens of Syrian fighters rose to stop them. MiG-21s, MiG-23s, armed, guided, advised by Soviet doctrine. The F-15s met them in the sky. What followed was one of the most one-sided air massacres in aviation history. Israeli Eagles shot down MiG after MiG, often before the Syrians even knew they were under attack. Radar dominance, superior missiles, better thrust to weight, better climb, better radar, better pilots, backed by an aircraft that refused to lose energy, refused to stall, refused to fall into disadvantage. The battle became a slaughter. By the end of the conflict, Israeli F-15s had killed dozens of enemy jets without losing a single aircraft. 0 losses. 0. That was the moment Soviet observers stopped laughing. The legend began to take shape in whispers first, then in official reports. The F-15 was not a paper champion, it was a monster. A machine built not to compete with Soviet technology but to crush it. But the Soviet Union still believed it could adapt. It still believed it could match the Eagle. It developed new fighters, the MiG-29, the Su-27, powerful aircraft with impressive capabilities. But by then, the F-15 was already rewriting the nature of air warfare. It proved it could carry heavy payloads while still out dogfighting lighter jets. It proved it could take off from rough runways and fly in brutal weather. It proved its engines could keep pushing even when damaged. And most importantly, it proved something deeper, that a perfect marriage of pilot and machine could create something unstoppable. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the record grew, quietly at first, then loudly. Japan flew the F-15J and trained relentlessly, knowing conflict with Soviet assets was possible. Saudi Arabia used the F-15 in decisive engagements against Iraqi aircraft. American Eagles patrolled every corner of the Cold War world, intercepting Soviet bombers, shadowing reconnaissance planes, mapping radar signatures. And then came 1991, the Gulf War, the first major test of the F-15C in large-scale American combat. The Soviets watched closely. Iraq flew Soviet fighters, MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, Mirage F-1s, aircraft rooted in Soviet design philosophy. Iraqi pilots trained under Soviet doctrine. Their radars were Soviet. Their missiles were Soviet. Their tactics were Soviet. And the F-15 met them in the sky. The results shocked the world. Eagle pilots shot down aircraft with such consistency and such precision that analysts assumed the numbers were inflated. They weren't. During the war, the F-15C scored at least 37 confirmed kills, 0 losses, not one. The Americans had proven it now. The Israelis had proven it before. Saudi Arabia had proven it. Japan had trained for it. Across decades, across continents, across conflicts, the F-15 kept doing the same impossible thing. Winning, every time. 104 victories, 0 defeats. No fighter in history had ever done anything like it. No fighter ever will. That record did not come from luck or myth. It came from a perfect storm of technology and discipline. The radar that saw farther, the engines that pushed harder, the structure that held tighter, the pilots who trained longer, and the doctrine that believed in absolute dominance. The Soviets learned the truth the hard way, not through propaganda, not through mockery, but through undeniable numbers written in the sky. The F-15 did not just win, it did not just survive. It carved its name into history with a precision that left no room for argument or denial. And by the time the world understood what it had become, the Eagle no longer needed to prove anything. It had already changed the sky forever. By the time the First Gulf War ended, and the world saw the final tally of aerial victories, the legend of the F-15 had grown beyond numbers. It was no longer simply a fighter jet with an impressive kill record. It had become something much more powerful, something that military strategists, rival nations, and even adversary pilots quietly acknowledged with a mixture of respect and fear. The F-15 had become the first aircraft in modern history to achieve what every air force had once dreamed of, but never actually reached. Complete, unquestioned, statistical dominance over the sky. And it wasn't just the victories that troubled Soviet analysts, it was the pattern. The way engagements unfolded. The way the Eagle shaped the fight from the moment it appeared on radar. The way enemy pilots seemed to realize, sometimes too late, that they were already losing before they even saw the aircraft with their own eyes. In numerous after-action reports, enemy pilots described a sensation that Soviet commanders hated to hear. They described feeling hunted. That psychological effect became a weapon all its own. But before the world accepted the F-15 as an untouchable predator, the Soviets tried to understand the machine they had once mocked. They studied radar tapes, telemetry logs, missile performance reports. They studied every engagement Israel had recorded in the Bekaa Valley. They studied the Saudi encounters over the Gulf. They studied American tactics during Desert Storm. And what they found terrified them. The F-15's success wasn't a fluke or a coincidence. It wasn't environmental, it wasn't technological luck, it was systematic. Every time the aircraft entered combat, it behaved with the same ruthless efficiency. It found its target. It fixed its position. It maneuvered to advantage. It fired first. It hit first. It survived every single counterattack. Soviet engineers began quietly admitting something they had never said publicly. The Americans had built a fighter they could not defeat with anything currently in production. In classified meetings, Soviet air doctrine advisors debated what could be done. Some argued for more training, others argued for new tactics, but the truth was simple. The F-15 was operating at a level that invalidated decades of Soviet air combat philosophy. Traditional Soviet doctrine emphasized numbers, saturation, aggressive vectoring, and overwhelming force. But the Eagle shattered that idea. It proved that one aircraft, flown by one highly trained pilot, backed by powerful sensors, long-range missiles, and unmatched thrust, could rewrite the rules of the sky alone. The Soviets responded with desperation and brilliance. They rushed to finalize the MiG-29 and Su-27, aircraft that could contest the Eagle in agility and energy retention. These new fighters were extraordinary, fast, powerful, beautifully engineered, capable of close-in maneuvering that outclassed many Western jets. On paper, they challenged the F-15. In ideal conditions, they might even match it. But paper was not the sky. And in the sky, the F-15 still held that single decisive advantage that no rival could take away. The Eagle dictated the terms of the fight. It saw first. It locked first. It shot first. And it survived first. Even Soviet pilots, who eventually flew the MiG-29, admitted privately that if the Eagle saw them before they reached visual range, the engagement was already lost. That belief spread quietly among Eastern Bloc pilots, creating a psychological shadow that followed the F-15 wherever NATO deployed it. American pilots sharpened that edge even further. They trained obsessively. They fought mock battles against each other, against F-14s, against F-4s, against aggressor squadrons flying MiG-style tactics. They learned every angle the Eagle could fly, every envelope it could exploit. The aircraft became an extension of their bodies, and the sky became familiar terrain they could read instinctively. This combination of machine and pilot built something unstoppable. The F-15 wasn't just dominating battles, it was erasing the idea of symmetrical air combat. In the 1990s, the United States continued to deploy F-15s around the world. Japan, Korea, Europe, the Middle East. Everywhere tensions rose. In every region, adversaries watched the Eagle with apprehension. Nobody wanted to be the pilot who ended the streak. Nobody wanted to test the myth directly. The number 104 began to circulate inside intelligence circles like a quiet warning. 104 kills, 0 losses. No fighter in the world had ever achieved such a record. And yet it was not just the victories that created the legend. It was the consistency, the pattern, the way every Eagle pilot seemed to repeat the same cycle, acquire the target, analyze the threat. Control the range, shape the fight, eliminate the enemy, return home untouched. This was not bravado. It was not ego. It was not American chest beating. It was discipline. Cold, structured, relentless discipline. Eagle pilots flew with an understanding that air combat was not a cinematic duel. It was mathematics, geometry, psychology, and timing. And the F-15 gave them mastery over all four. Meanwhile, the Soviets faced humiliation of a different kind. Several of their top pilots defected or retired early, admitting quietly that they would never want to face an F-15 in real combat. Their fears were validated further when NATO gained access to East German MiG-29s after reunification. American and German test pilots flew the MiG aggressively, pushing it to its limits. They found that while the MiG-29 was spectacular in close combat, it lacked the radar reach, missile guidance sophistication, and pilot-friendly ergonomics of the F-15. And when the two jets met in training exercises, the results were sobering. In nearly every scenario where the F-15 saw the MiG first, the MiG died quickly. Even when visual range was forced, the Eagle still won more consistently than expected due to its superior energy retention and pilot visibility. The Soviets no longer laughed, they no longer mocked. Instead, they accepted a truth that stung deeply. The F-15 was not built to match them, it was built to surpass them entirely. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, the legacy of the Eagle continued to grow. American air power relied on it for quick interception, long-range air control, combat air patrols, and deep strike escort. The Eagle's wings patrolled the Persian Gulf, deterred conflict in the Korean Peninsula, and provided air dominance over no-fly zones across multiple conflict zones. Every time the F-15 appeared on radar, enemy pilots hesitated. Every time its call sign entered a region, tensions dropped. No one wanted to fight it. No one wanted to test the numbers. No one wanted to become the first recorded kill against a machine that refused to die. By the early 2000s, the F-15 had become something more than a fighter. It had become the embodiment of an idea. That air superiority is not granted. It is taken, earned, enforced. The aircraft became a symbol of American precision, discipline, and ruthless commitment to never losing a pilot in the sky. Even the introduction of the F-22 Raptor did not overshadow what the Eagle represented. Because history is not written only by new machines, it is written by the record, and the F-15's record was untouchable. 104 victories, 0 losses. No jet on Earth had ever achieved a number remotely close. And those victories were not against outdated aircraft. They were against MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, Mirage F-1s, Su-7s, and other fighters across multiple nations, armed, trained, and advised by Soviet doctrine. The psychological effect of that record still echoes across the world today. Modern Russian pilots respect the Eagle deeply. Chinese strategists analyze it in detail. NATO pilots train under its shadow. The F-35 and F-22 may be the future, but the F-15 is the reason they exist at all. Because the Eagle proved something that changed aviation forever. It proved that one perfect machine, flown by one perfectly trained pilot, could dominate the sky against any number of opponents. It proved that survival was not luck, but design. It proved that superiority, once achieved, could be maintained with discipline. But more than anything else, it proved that the Soviets were wrong to laugh. Because when the F-15 entered the sky itself changed sides. And every pilot who flew beneath those wings carried the same unspoken knowledge. The Eagle did not fear the enemy. The enemy feared the Eagle. That was the true legacy of the F-15. A legacy that no statistic, no propaganda, no revision of history will ever erase. And that legacy was built battle by battle, kill by kill, mile by mile, until the record stood alone at the top of aviation history. 104 victories. 0 losses, not by accident, not by luck, but by design, and by belief. The belief that air dominance is not something you hope for, it is something you build, something you earn, and something you defend without hesitation. Long after the Cold War ended, after the Berlin Wall fell, after Soviet archives cracked open and pilots from both sides finally spoke with honesty instead of propaganda, a strange pattern emerged. Across interviews, debriefings, and closed-door discussions, former Soviet pilots admitted something that had never been written in any official manual. They had feared the F-15 long before they ever saw it in combat. The reputation of the Eagle had crossed borders faster than any aircraft. Stories from the Middle East, fragments of intelligence reports, intercepted radio calls, even whispers from advisors stationed in Syria and Iraq. Together, they painted a picture of a machine that did not behave like anything the Soviets had built or trained against. In the dark corridors of military academies in Moscow and Kyiv, instructors would warn new cadets that when an F-15 entered the sky, the geometry of the battlefield belonged to the Americans. Younger pilots thought it was exaggeration. Older ones knew it wasn't. They had studied the radar patterns, the engagement envelopes, the missile trajectories. They had seen how one F-15 could dismantle entire formations of MiGs by forcing them into energy-bleeding climbs and hopeless turns. But the deepest fear came from something harder to quantify. The Eagle did not just outperform its enemies. It erased them before they understood what was happening. That fear influenced decisions at the highest levels. Soviet tacticians redesigned entire training syllabi with the assumption that if war ever broke out in Central Europe, the F-15s would be the first aircraft NATO launched. MiG-29 squadrons were told to avoid long-range engagements against Eagles at all costs. Su-27 pilots were trained to break radar locks with violent maneuvers, even if it meant sacrificing optimal angles. None of it felt confident. All of it felt like a concession. Meanwhile, the United States continued shaping the Eagle into an even sharper blade. The aircraft gained new radars, new missiles, new avionics, new data link systems. Its pilots grew even more disciplined,